Welcome to The Explainer. So let's talk about something that can be, well, super annoying. Have you ever had that nagging feeling that something's stuck in your throat? Or maybe you're dealing with a stuffy nose that just will not clear up? Today, we're going to dig into the surprising connection between these two common issues, and, more importantly, how you can actually find some relief.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle that weird feeling in your throat and figure out what tonsil stones actually are. Then, we'll get into the safe ways you can deal with them. After that, we're going to explore why it might not just be your throat by looking at the whole nasal connection. And we'll wrap it all up with some simple, practical tips for breathing easier.
All right, first up, let's talk about that strange sensation that sends so many people to the doctor. You know the one I'm talking about? It's this kind of vague, but just persistent feeling. And it's totally understandable that it can cause a lot of anxiety.
So, does any of this sound familiar? Maybe you've got that constant feeling of a lump in your throat, or you're fighting bad breath that won't go away, no matter how many times you brush your teeth. Some people even cough up this tiny, smelly, yellowish particle. If you're nodding along right now, you are definitely in the right place.
So what in the world is the likely culprit behind these symptoms? Let's jump into our next section and really decode what these mysterious little things actually are.
These little lumps have an official name: tonsil stones or tonsilloliths. And here's what's going on. Little bits of food, dead cells, and all sorts of other gunk get trapped in the nooks and crannies of your tonsils. Your toothbrush just can't reach back there, so this stuff just sits, hardens, and, well, it can create a pretty nasty odor.
You know, I absolutely love this analogy. It says that if you get a lot of throat infections, the surface of your tonsils can become all uneven, like the surface of the moon. And all those little grooves and craters, they create the absolute perfect traps for debris to collect and then form into stones.
So really, it all boils down to a few key things. You've got food particles getting stuck in those little tonsil pockets. That's the #1 cause. If you happen to have larger tonsils, well, there's just more real estate for this to happen. And, like we just talked about, a history of tonsillitis can make the surface all rough, which definitely increases your chances. And get this, you can actually check for them yourself at home. Just grab a spoon, get in front of a mirror with some really good light. If you gently press your tongue down and say, ah, it helps to really expose your tonsils, so you can see if there are any of those little white or yellowish spots back there.
Okay, so we've identified the problem. Now for the million-dollar question. How do you deal with it safely? Let's walk through some effective things you can do at home, and just as importantly, what you should absolutely not do.
All right, 2 of the simplest and safest things you can try right away. First, a really strong, forceful cough. You're basically trying to create a little burst of air pressure to pop a stone out. Second is gargling, but there's a specific way to do it if you want to actually clean your tonsils and not just your mouth.
And this right here is probably the most important slide. Here's what you should do. Tilt your head way, way back when you gargle to really flush out your tonsils. A gentle water jet device can also be helpful. But the big takeaway is what not to do. Please, don't go poking around back there with sticks, cotton swabs, or your fingers.
This is so important. Trying to physically pick or scrape at the stones yourself is just not a good idea. You can really injure that delicate tonsil tissue, which can cause bleeding or inflammation. And here's the real kicker: you can actually make those grooves bigger over time, creating even larger traps and making the whole problem happen more often.
But what if you've checked and tonsil stones aren't really the issue for you, or maybe they're not the only issue? Let's pull on that thread a bit, because this might lead us to a very surprising place: your nose.
Just think about how you breathe for a second, especially when you're sleeping. If your nose is always stuffy, chances are you're breathing through your mouth all night. And when that happens, your mouth dries out, which gets rid of your saliva, and saliva is basically your mouth's natural cleaning service. That alone can be a huge cause of bad breath.
And yeah, there are several nasal conditions that can be the root cause here. Sinusitis, for example, can create this thick, smelly mucus that drips down the back of your throat. That's postnasal drip. It's a direct pipeline for bad breath. And the problem behind it could be anything from allergies to something structural, like a deviated septum.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, yup, my nose is definitely part of the problem, what can you actually do about it? Let's move on to some practical, everyday tips to improve your nasal health so you can finally breathe easier.
You know, a daily nasal rinse is kind of like washing your hands. It's just a simple hygiene habit with huge benefits. It helps clear out dust, allergens, and all the gunk from the air. The key is to use lukewarm salt water, tilt your head about 45 degrees, and here's the trick. Say ah as you gently squeeze the bottle.
That little sound keeps the water from going down your throat. And here's a pro tip. That's just brilliant. If you suspect sinusitis is your issue, especially if you're seeing that yellow post-nasal drip, you can tweak your technique a bit. By aiming the rinse slightly upwards, sort of towards the sinus opening right under your eye, you can really get in there and flush out all of that trapped, smelly mucus. It's a small change that can make a massive difference.
Okay, here's a super common one. Does this happen to you? The second your head hits the pillow, bam, your nose is suddenly completely stuffed up. If that's you, there are a few simple things in your bedroom you can change, like tonight.
And here are 3 things that can be total game changers for nighttime congestion. First, dust mite-proof bedding can be a lifesaver if you have allergies. Second, fight back against gravity. Lying flat lets things swell up in your nose, so just propping your head up on a slightly higher pillow can make a huge difference. And third, this one is my favorite. Use a humidifier. Keeping the air moisture between 40 and 60% prevents your throat and nose from drying out. You'll wake up feeling so much better.
So, the big takeaway from all of this is that you really don't have to just suffer through this discomfort. Whether it's learning to gargle the right way, trying a simple nasal rinse, or just adding an extra pillow, these small, consistent habits can lead to big improvements in how you feel every single day. The only question is, which small habit are you going to start tonight?